Good morning, SaaStr. How many of you remember where you were in March of 2020? I know where I was. I was sitting at home, probably like most of you, on my computer watching the news as the very beginning of the pandemic shutdown happened, when we were told it would only be 2 or 3 weeks. Wait for it to wash out. But I was waiting for something else. We were working on a new company that had been in stealth for about 1.5 years at that point, called WorkOS. And we were getting ready to launch it. And our launch plan for WorkOS was not to go get a super exclusive story from a top publication. It wasn't to pay a PR firm or do any sort of blowout. We launched WorkOS on this niche website for developers called Hacker News. And our goal was to be on the top of Hacker News all day, this niche audience with developers. At the end of that day, we had no snarky comments from developers, and that was really the gem that we knew that we were onto an idea.
Now, it's kind of remarkable what Michael's saying, right? To launch a company with a single tweet or a post on Hacker News seems bizarre, but it's actually kind of par for the course when it comes to developer-facing companies. If we were giving this talk even a couple of years ago, we'd be trying to convince you all as SaaS companies to be adding a platform or an API to your products, but that train has left the station. Most of you in the audience are working on developer tools, developer-facing companies, or your product already has a platform or an API. But what's still a little bit of a black box is what are the actual tactics, right? What are the most effective ways to go to market with this very unique audience of developers or very technical buyers? And so that's what we're going to share with you today. As Michael said, WorkOS and his previous company, Nihilus, also launched on Hacker News as their tactic. But that's not dissimilar to how Retool launched, how Stripe launched. I'm also very new to OpenAI, so I'm not going to talk as much about OpenAI today, but there's a lot of learnings that we've kind of hard won over the past decades working on developer-facing products that we want to share with you all. We have about 20 minutes for this talk, so we're just going to catch the very tippy top of the iceberg, but give you sort of a broad spectrum of different areas and topics that you might want to consider when it comes to going to market with developers. And we hope that whets your appetite for what this could unlock for you and your business. Every company is becoming a platform company, so I hope there's something for everyone to take away. Let's start with user acquisition.
All right, let's jump in. So acquiring users, the first step when you're launching a business is actually to get users, right? Eventually they'll pay, but you want to get them to acquire them first. Acquiring users for developer products is a bit different than acquiring them for other SaaS products, where you might run Google ads or, like I said, hire a PR firm. If you were launching a traditional company, maybe the dream would be to get, a feature piece in the New York Times, get their commentary on your product, and that would really set the stage for the consumer sort of perception of what you've launched. In the world of developer tools, developers are not reading the New York Times. They're on the platform formerly known as Twitter, now X. That's where developers congregate. That's where they share ideas. That's where they talk about what's new and what's cool. So you really need to win them over on that platform. Similarly, if you were to launch a new company, you might try to get on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Like a front page piece, would be a traditional marketing win. Developers aren't reading the Wall Street Journal. The front page that developers care about is what I described here, Hacker News, which is sort of like Reddit. It's a message board for developers and technology enthusiasts looking for the great new thing. And there are countless companies that have launched just with the show HN post. These are a couple ways that you can acquire those customers, acquire those users, I should say. I really want to emphasize that it's super important to be authentic with developers, and that really means being technical with them. When you create content, you want it to be authoritative and really like high integrity with developers. It's really hard to fake this if you're not technical. You need to get an engineer actually to usually write it or review the content. You can also give conference talks, have an engineering blog. One of the most important things is for leadership to directly get involved. For those of you familiar with Stripe, Patrick Colliston, the CEO, still regularly gets on Hacker News and just comments like the rest of us on new press releases about Stripe or new feature announcements. And developers love that. They love hearing directly from technical leadership. Early on, you want to avoid all the typical marketing tactics, no search engine marketing, no webinars. The golden rule here should really just be provide as much value as you can and ask for nothing in return. It might seem counterproductive, but it's a long game that you're building here. And if you do this right, it should work. Here are a bunch of different brands and different companies that have invested in their developer experience and developer audience early on. You probably notice a theme of the colors between the purplish blue and the dark mode. That's definitely in fashion. But the audience that they've built and the momentum that they've built, they've been able to turn into really large, meaningful businesses down the line. So it's definitely worth investing in. Last thing I want to say about this, developer brand has to be built first. You can't add this later. You can't slap it on at some point in the future. You can't build a great product and then kind of hope to win over developers later on. It's really about building trust with them. It takes a long time to create it and build it up, and you can be fast to lose it. So definitely, I would say, try to invest in it as early as you can, and then continue to maintain it over time. It's almost like kind of winning a fashion show with the developer audience. There could be a whole talk about this, but we're going to move on. Secret number one, though, focus on the brand first with developers, and sequence all your acquisition tactics after that. Now we'll talk about outbound.
Well, Michael and I have been friends for some time now, so I think he'll be fine if I disagree with him in that you want to sequence all of traditional marketing, mostly after the brand building and the sort of goodwill with developers. But one thing that you have to sequence upfront is outbound sales. And the reason that I say that is that you might actually think this is quite surprising for developers because you think they hate outbound sales. They hate getting emails in their inbox. But there's this sort of misnomer in the market that if you build it, they'll come. You build this great product, this great developer experience, and of course the developers are going to bang down your doors and try to use it and go evangelize it to their friends. Folks, that's a pipe dream. The way that you want to think about this is that you want to hone your message. Sales doesn't lie. When you do outbound sales and you send these cold emails to people who have never heard about your product, it actually validates your messaging, your positioning, the value that developers might get from your product. So here are a couple of lessons in outbounding to get it right. One is warm outbound is always better than cold outbound. So instead of just spraying and praying to a bunch of audiences that you find from Apollo or from Lead Genius, instead you put your investor networks to good use. You can, of course, use ChatGPT Enterprise, which we launched last week, to create very custom emails to the audiences that you're trying to get to. Send those off to your investors and make sure that they're forwarding them on to the right folks in their network. Don't rely on just a sales team or a BDR function in order to be doing this outbounding. A founder-to-founder email is much stronger, or even like a CTO-to-CTO email is much stronger in terms of the results you might get. Shape your positioning through that iteration. What sticks and what doesn't will be very apparent, and that sort of iteration cycle is very short when it comes to outbounding. So that's another way to pressure test your messaging with technical audiences. Find the right targets, because your practitioners, your developers who are actually using your product may actually be quite different than the decision makers who might be engineering managers, CTOs, or even CFOs are often in the mix these days when it comes to the go-to-market motion. And then scale the process alongside as you start to find your positioning. Oftentimes in developer platforms, you have a cold start problem. You have this blank canvas. You're giving developers a box of Legos and telling them they can build whatever they want. And sometimes it's helpful to provide blueprints for success. So as you start seeing patterns in how people are using your product, we did this at Retool. We created patterns for how sales teams were using Retool, how healthcare teams were using Retools, how people in the transportation vertical were using Retool. And that was a great way to increase the effectiveness of outbound. So sales doesn't lie. PLG is sort of par for the course these days. It's de rigueur when it comes to developer marketing. But outbound is a great way to pressure test it in the early days and as you're scaling a new product. The other thing that I want to talk about is pricing. So how many of you launched a new product or feature in the last year? Great. How many of you changed your pricing in the last year? Okay, fewer of you. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say your pricing is probably wrong. These days, it seems like most companies are using usage-based pricing models, and that's a great way to think about developer-facing products. But increasingly, there's more hybrid models that are coming into play. People are using seat-based pricing as well as usage-based models and consumption models, and that's really important to think about. But there's not one way to fix your pricing. What I'm actually going to say instead is that you really need to experiment. So here's the example from Vercel when it was even back when it was called Zeit. They changed their pricing. They tried a bunch of different pricing models over the years, and that iteration has gotten them to a place that is much more solid for what they want to create. Pricing is always a two-way door, right? It's a two-way handshake. On the one hand, you're trying to communicate the value of your product, and on the other hand, your audiences are returning the favor and telling you where they find value in your product. So that handshake is really important, and the only way that you'll get there is with experimentation. Retool had a freemium model when we first started, a 2-week free trial. And we experimented with introducing a free plan that was free forever. And that actually increased our top of funnel quite a bit. we lowered our pricing later on, and we also introduced a new self-serve business model where you did not have to talk to a sales team member in order to get on those more advanced plans. That also increased both our top of funnel and closed won rates for our sales teams. So again, the reality here is that if you are changing your product and you're not changing your pricing alongside, they're probably not in lockstep, and you should revisit.
Pricing, pricing, pricing. Another whole topic. All right, number 4. Let's talk about product portfolios and the cross-sell. So if any of you have talked to VCs or investors about product strategy, oftentimes they'll say, you want to just do one thing and do it really well. Focus, focus, focus. And I think the only thing better than one product that does really well, actually, is a bunch of products that do well inside of a company. So I want to talk about the value of having a multi-product portfolio, actually how you can execute on it. And before I jump into this, just want to share, with developer platforms, this is possible. With a lot of other companies, you actually might not be able to take your product and break it into pieces, but it's actually possible to do this as a component system with developer platforms. This is unique to that type of a strategy. So why pursue multiple products? More products, larger TAM. You got more stuff that you can sell. You can address a wider audience. You also have more entry points to sell a customer. Maybe they don't need product A, but they need product B. You can start with product B. Eventually, they might buy product A, right? So you'll have that expansion effect with lower energy. It's always easier to sell to an existing customer that you have. And as you accumulate multiple products that you're selling, you really have this distribution advantage. You already have a customer base that you can go sell to compared to single products. And if you look at companies like Microsoft over time, they've executed on this really, really well. So there's obviously a big advantage to this. What companies have done this? Well, Stripe has done this really well. Stripe started with payments, right? Just the credit card charge. They added invoicing. They added payouts. There's a bunch of different Stripe products now. Even with WorkOS, we're 4 or 5 years old. We already have multiple products. We started with authentication. We added user management. We have a product around audit logging, all needed by the same customer base. Atlassian has done this too. You might not love their products like Jira and Confluence, but they've been really successful at it, right? And built many, many different ones. And perhaps the most successful developer platform multi-product company is AWS. They started with storage. A lot of people forget S3 was their first product. Then they launched EC2, then network stuff, and Route 53, and yada, yada. And today, Amazon has a lot of products, right? They've executed on this extremely, extremely well. They pretty much have everything you need to build a modern SaaS product. So it's really effective if you can execute on it. What are the pitfalls to watch out for? Well, initiating this too early actually might split your focus away from your core first business. If you think about kind of a rocket taking off, the first stage has got to burn out before you can get to the second stage. So you want to do it early, but not too early. Secondly, your engineering team might just want to work on the new stuff, the new shiny stuff. So you have to figure out how to split your bets with the older product that you're supporting. Sometimes it's just generally harder to justify new bets when you have a business that's already succeeding. This is the classic innovator's dilemma, if you've ever read that book. It's hard to build that conviction when you have revenue coming from existing products. And I think this one's actually the most scary pitfall, is that if your two products or multiple products actually have a different sales motion or a sales culture, you actually might not get the benefits that I mentioned in the previous slide around that kind of distribution advantage or sales advantage. So you need to make sure that the way that people adopt and the way that you sell it is similar. Okta acquired Auth0 a few years ago. Very different sales motions, and they've had a really, really tough time integrating those products together. So huge upside if you can do it well. A lot of downsides if you don't do it well. But secret number 4 is it can really supercharge your product lineup and your revenue.
OK, now I feel a little self-conscious even talking about demand generation because I was an engineer before I was a marketer, so I'm quite a skeptical marketing leader. But demand gen, when you do it right, there's this misnomer that developers hate marketing, and the reality is they just hate bad marketing. And so let's talk a little bit about those good examples. The neat thing is if you can sort of study the playbooks of what works and then sort of adapt that and really make it your own for that developer audience, it can actually be quite effective. So here's an example from Mux. Mux created DMux, which is the industry conference for video professionals. This is a conference that did not exist before, but it's now the sort of preeminent gathering for that community to come together. A really effective way for them to build an audience and also even build a function and a role that they were then selling into. Field marketing and conferences, just like the one that we're at, kind of get a bad rap sometimes because all you're trying to optimize for is the number of badges that you're scanning. Retool, when we started doing field events, We did not optimize for the number of badges scanned. We actually looked much more down funnel in terms of the pipeline that it was generating. So that means we captured fewer leads, but we did deep custom demos to every single person who was coming by our booth because they're very technical audiences. All of the events that we went to were more than 2x ROI positive for us in terms of the deals that we won. Again, outbound emails, they get a bad rap. I talked about this before because most people pattern match to the bad stuff that you get in your inbox day in and day out. Instead, if you can write a really custom email that hits the nail on the head of a problem that an engineer is facing and how you're going to improve it, it can be really, really effective. Content, again, there's so many listicles and bad crap out on the internet. I really think that the sort of norm of what is actually on the internet today is not great. But when it's, again, done well, and it's done for the thought of getting very technical content from an engineer to another engineer, especially in the developer space, is actually a broader lesson for all of us marketers in that we should be putting out content that speaks up to the audience, not down to them. Here's an example, again, from Retool. We put out a post about what's a CRM to engineers, and it explained that very well to a very technical audience, and it did extremely well. Even today, 5 years after the post went out, it's still one of the top drivers of traffic to the company organically. I'm going to skip past a little bit of these examples because we don't have a ton of time left. But again, doing things that are altruistic for the community actually pay off a lot of dividends. They might be a little bit harder to measure in sort of a return window, but again, it's brand building as well as demand building. We ran an open source retreat at Stripe where we invited open source developers to come in and work on their projects from Stripe with a stipend. That worked very well in terms of what they were able to accomplish in the time that they spent with us. And many other companies also picked up the baton and ran their own open source retreats. I love the 1.1.1 campaign from Cloudflare. Again, this is altruistic. They put it out there as a service to the community, not with the intent of driving demand, but definitely increase their brand and the number of leads that they got in the door. So learn those demand best practices and then deviate. If you do the thing that everyone else is doing, that's not going to serve you well with developers.
The last secret we want to talk about has to do with org design, really how to think about building your initial sales team and support team together. So I would posit for developer products, most developers signing up just want to test something out, see the experience. There's a lot of free plans in developer products, kind of free to get started. Twilio pioneered this in a big way. What I would tell you is that early sales for developer products, it looks like great support. It doesn't look like sales, it looks like support. With usage-based products, your long-term value, really the terminal contract value you're going to sell to customers, is actually dominated by expansion. That first month that the developer puts in the credit card or the first deal you sign is going to be a very, very small amount of the long-term value. The third year might be larger than year 1 and 2 combined. So the whole game there is to keep that customer, keep them happy, keep them expanding, keep them building on your platform. And you want to do this by optimizing for a really, really great customer experience via support. Later, you can layer in traditional sales. You can always add it later. You can add it piecemeal. You can add it as needed. But you want to start with a great support and a great experience. This is a picture of actually an early salesperson from Stripe, who we both know, Matt Yalowitz, who is actually here in front of a customer describing how Stripe works, just kind of laying out, here's the technical diagram of how all this kind of comes together. And this is a shared Slack channel between Stripe and Spotify, which was an early Stripe customer, working on their integration, getting product feedback. Doesn't really look like typical sales, almost looks like a collaborator. We do this really heavily at WorkOS. This is a screenshot of our Slack. We have hundreds and hundreds of shared Slack channels with customers. We're almost like an extension of their team. That has turned into sales for us, right? It started with support, started with this customer support motion, eventually drives revenue growth. You want to think about not always be closing, but always be helping. If you can help developers achieve their goals, the deal will happen. They'll build on top of you. They'll pay for it. And this begins with that early discovery, relationship building, having a lot of empathy for that audience. Your initial sales team probably looks more like general purpose individual contributors, people that are scrappy, willing to roll up their sleeves, maybe more like a typical customer success team rather than a sales team. And if you do this really, really well, if you give an extraordinary level of support, you can actually sell this. People are willing to pay for this because it's so unique and such a differentiator. So secret number 6, great sales begins with great support.
So we're in our last 30 seconds of the time allotted to us. So again, we barely scratched the surface for what it means to really effectively go to market for developers. this is not meant to be a playbook, right? The thing that we're trying to communicate is that what you have to do is diagnose what your company needs, what your developer community needs. So know your product, know your customer, and really connect the two in meaningful ways. So again, Michael and I really like to geek out about this stuff as when we talk. So if there's anything that you want to chat with us about, we're around for questions, and then we'll be around the conference for the rest of the day.
You can catch probably both of us at the WorkOS booth right behind you right after this.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.